To start, just a brief introduction of me. Um, my name is Rose. I am currently working at the Medical University of South Carolina as a research technician. I work in rheumatology. We study estrogen receptor signaling in a scleroderma disease model. I have my bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences, and I graduated in December of 2022. So I've been working just in the lab since then. Started pretty immediately after graduation. Um, I am currently looking towards probably getting my PhD. I really am interested in biochemistry and immunology and kind of those intersections. Um, I didn't always know that I wanted to go get a PhD when I was graduating from my undergraduate university. I had considered a couple different healthcare career fields just because those were the only jobs I really knew existed. And as I was graduating, I really realized I was going to miss working with high level technical cell biology level science. And so that's where I started exploring research and ended up where I am now. That's kind of how I found my way into biomedical research. I really started this whole kind of gap year situation with a big open mind. Um, when I was about to graduate with my undergraduate degree, um, I went to the career counselor at my university and I was talking to her about my situation where I said, I'm currently considering patient care as a career field, but I'm realizing, when I graduate, that'll be the last cell biology course I'll ever take. That'll be the last time my test says, how does this molecule bind with this one? And I kind of don't want to let that science go. So I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. And she said, I bet you would like research. And I was like, well, of course. But I don't have the resume for that. I haven't been researching for the last 7 years of my life. And she said, don't worry about it. That's my job. Tell me about your experiences. Um, and because I had been in a biomedical sciences, 4-year degree, of course, I had a lot of experiences that actually were pretty applicable to um, scientific research. And she said, well, where do you want to look? And I knew a couple people in Charleston, South Carolina. And I said, well, that might not be a bad place to look. And kind of ended up here. I've really, really been enjoying the way that I get to be inquisitive in this job, where I get to continually use my brain, the way I'm learning, I'm not just doing, and the way that, no 2 days are the same. I'm always doing something different and thinking hard and using my brain. So after I've been in my current position about a year and a month or some change, and I've really, really been enjoying it. And so that's kind of how I started to think, I think I would like to do this long term. Um, and that I'll hopefully be going into a PhD program eventually. Um, some things that I learned from participating in research during this gap year. I think that I really have benefited from this gap year being kind of low stakes. Of course, the research I do matters, and we're working towards publication with my current PI and trying to be efficient and cost effective. But I've really enjoyed that I've kind of gotten a really, really good overview of what it looks like to research. I've gotten to learn the habits of troubleshooting. I've gotten to learn the bad habits and then relearn and then do the good habits of data recording. And I really think those are things that, as I've talked to different people or listened to different podcasts about people in their PhD programs, those are things that oftentimes you have to learn in your PhD program if you go straight through. That can really add stress or add years onto your PhD project, that I'm getting to learn now in a really kind of low pressure environment where, of course, what I do matters and my data recording matters. But it's not going to like add years on my education. And I'm also balancing classes, but I've really gotten to get a good idea of what it looks like to research, what it looks like to troubleshoot. I think some of those things about, more specifically, things I've learned would be record absolutely everything. Somebody told me that my first day. He said to me, write the date on literally anything you write down. Um, but I really think I've been able to learn really good, better habits. Like I said, bad habits, then good habits of my data recording, writing everything down, learning what details matter. I've gotten better at keeping the big picture in mind. I think it's easy in research to kind of spin your wheels and troubleshoot and just say, why isn't this experiment working? But I've really learned the process of kind of taking a step back and saying, well, what's the big picture? Does this experiment need to be optimized, or what am I trying to get out of this experiment in the first place? So again, those are just specifics that I think it's not like you can't learn that while in a PhD program. But I think I've really benefited from being able to learn that before I start a PhD so that I can be more successful in that higher pressure environment of it's education and it matters and there's a lot on my plate. I think some tips that I would give people who are currently applying for postbac research positions. I think don't undersell yourself. Like I said, when I was getting that advice from my career counselor that you really might be interested in research, I said, well, of course, that's the dream job. But I don't have the resume for that, so I can't do it at all. And she said, well, just tell me about your experiences. And I had been selected as a team leader in a mock research program in my cell biology lab. I had conducted a literature review synthesis thesis project for the honors program at my university. I had worked with animals in my immunology course that was just part of the curriculum. I had multiple high-level science courses, of course, because that was my major. And so I think it's easy to think, coming out of undergrad, well, I don't have any experience. And I remember actually during my interview really underselling myself to the PI. And thank goodness that she saw through that modesty and really saw a lot of potential in me. But I remember her asking about my research synthesis thesis, and she was asking about the process of literature review that I did. And I remember saying, well, it wasn't much, it was just a little literature review synthesis. But as I talked through what I had done, she was like, that's what I'm looking for, is somebody who knows how to read the research, who knows how to do more than just read a single paper, but to in their mind really be synthesizing the information that they're intaking. So it's easy to undersell yourself and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not smart enough for this job. But your experiences, they matter. And as I've talked to multiple different PIs, as I've interviewed for multiple jobs, the overwhelming response I get is, we don't care if you've published in Nature. What they want to see is that somebody has a curiosity, has a drive for science, and understands, what it looks like to research something, to synthesize information and make new information. So don't undersell yourself when you're interviewing or even when you're applying. You miss all the shots you don't take. So if there's a research job that looks really interesting that based on your education, you are qualified for, don't be afraid to highlight your classroom experiences as research. And don't be afraid to allow your passion to be a valuable piece of you, especially when you don't have, a PhD on your resume. People are still they value passion for research. If somebody's interested in research and they're teachable, I think that's a lot more valuable than I have no curiosity, but I did a lot of experiments in a lab when a professor told me to do them. How did my undergrad experiences help me stand out while applying for jobs in biomedical research? I kind of highlighted this a little bit, but I think the biggest things that, in talking to my PI now that I have this job, that stood out to her was my thesis experience. So I didn't conduct any experiments for my thesis. It was purely a literature review, but I learned the process of synthesizing information, reading papers, finding papers based on parameters, using databases. And that was valuable to her, that I was going to know how to troubleshoot. I was going to know how to seek out current information while working for her. And it wasn't going to be something she had to really try and teach me. As well as my being selected as a team leader for the mock research project, I think, showed her that I I was capable in doing experiments, and that had been recognized by professors in the past. But I think one thing that is unconventional, that isn't like something you can put on a resume easily, was my curiosity. One question she asked me was during my TA experiences, I had been a TA in a microbiology lab. She said, well, what do you do when you're not sure what's going on and there's a question about the procedure? And what I told her, which is true, was that I had actually had multiple instances where I walked into the lab and we thought that we were prepared because we had prepped for the lab, but there was a discrepancy in the procedure, or we were going to be teaching differential testing. Um, for me, I never want to do anything unless I know why and I know what's going on and I understand kind of the foundation of that. And so that was something that I had practiced a lot as a TA, was before I started the lab, before I told people what to do, I knew exactly why they were doing it. I exactly knew what to do if it went wrong and why a certain troubleshooting technique might be taken. And I collaborated as well. I had other TAs. I would collaborate with the professor to figure out, what are we going to do here? Why is this going wrong? Or why is there a discrepancy in the procedure? And I think that also stood out in my interviewing, that I wasn't somebody who just did things without knowing why. Because in science, that can waste a lot of time. If you're doing a procedure and you don't know exactly why, there's a high chance you'll do it wrong, or you'll just do a wrong concentration because you don't understand why the concentration matters. So I think my experience as a TA, combined with my personality of always wanting to know the why, really helped me stand out. Even though I didn't have, 3 years in a research lab, I just had your regular old 4-year degree and experiences. But that allowed me to be in the position I am today. So then networking is not something I'm very good at. I think it's easy to feel bashful about, you know, that cold call or that cold LinkedIn message. But I will say, an interesting kind of networking that I've done that's actually really benefited my research, is using ResearchGate, which is an unconventional way to like network. But there was a specific instance this year where there was a pilot project that I wanted to try, but wanted to not, spend a lot of funds on it. And there was a certain procedure called RNA scope that I was looking into, but the people who created that procedure required that you use their very specific oven that was like $5,000. And I was trying to find out, can I not use this oven? And so I was just looking in ResearchGate. But I wasn't only looking at the answers to the questions, I was also looking at the people. And I ended up finding out that somebody at my institution, the Medical University of South Carolina, was also looking into that oven, and she had commented, oh, I ended up just buying the oven. Thanks for your help. No need to figure out if I can do it without. And so I actually searched up in the directory her email. She was a PI, like 2 buildings over in neurology. But I searched up her email and said, hi, you don't know me, but I work in the division of rheumatology. I saw in ResearchGate that you mentioned you have this oven. I'm curious what your experience has been with it, or if I could take a look. And she said, yeah, absolutely. Here's my postdoc's information. And you can watch her do the whole procedure if you'd like, so that you can learn. And I think that's not your conventional, my perception at least, that's not your conventional personal career networking. But it's definitely a type of collaboration that is the type of collaboration that's self-initiated, that helped me decide actually not to use that procedure. But developing that relationship with that PI all the way in neurology helped me save money on my procedures, and better understand how I could develop this pilot project that I've been working on. So I think it doesn't have to just look like sending messages on LinkedIn. I think it's a mindset of really wanting to use your connections to better your science and your research. And if that means elevating your career connections for your next step, that's great. But if it also just means collaborating in kind of a cold call kind of way, that can also help. Yeah, so that's just kind of been my experience in this like gap year of really gaining some skills in research, really defining what areas I'm most interested in, and then developing those skills that I think are going to help me succeed even more as a PhD and maybe have a little less of a learning curve in a PhD. So if you have any questions or you just want to reach out and hear more about my experience or where I end up, that's absolutely fine. You can send me a message or a request on LinkedIn. I check that every so often and kind of ask me about my experiences there. Or send me a message through any of the other media that Mia will link for me as well. One other thing I wanted to say that I forgot to mention, one thing that I think I've really benefited from in this gap year is finding a balance of pace when it comes to research so that I can succeed long term. I think one thing that's a really common topic of conversation these days in academia specifically is that work-life balance or mental health or maintaining a certain level of balance within your work. And that was something really important to me when I was considering a PhD, was considering science. I thought, well, let me see what it's like for the people who are doing it. So I followed a bunch of accounts on Instagram of people doing their PhDs just to see what's their experience like. And a lot of what I saw was burnout, mental health struggles, which can be connected to burnout. And I was really concerned, like, why are so many people burning out of science? And I actually talked to my current PI about it, who's an MD PhD. So like she works very, very hard, continues to work hard. And I asked her, why are so many people burning out of science and how can I avoid that? And her advice to me was really find a balance where science isn't your only life. Like you've got personal pursuits that obviously make time to succeed in science, but don't let this be your whole identity. And I think it's easy as a student to just really not have the margin to do anything else, which is understandable. Like being a student is a very demanding occupation. But I think on the front end of that education, being able to just have that 40-hour a week job where I go home, I've got time to myself, I've got time to develop my personal interests now that I've finished my 4-year degree, has been really valuable for me, that I feel I'm more prepared for kind of when the storms of stress and high workloads of PhD come into my life, that I might be more prepared to kind of take those in stride. Not that it's anybody's fault that they're burning out, but that I know for me, I'm a little bit of a workaholic, and I'm finding that balance of not staying till 7 p.m. every day at the lab, or because I've got a 40-hour work week, I stayed till about 7 p.m. on Friday because there was a lot of experiments I wanted to get done. But I left really early on Thursday because I knew that that was going to happen. So finding that balance has really made me more confident that when it is time for a PhD, that I'm going to be able to handle that stress a lot more. So that's just a consideration. If you worked really hard in your undergrad, maybe it is a good idea to take that gap year. Hopefully that'll be helpful to some.